Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. It is time for another true crime video yet again, and today we will be talking about the case of Heather Tell. Heather Tell was a 17-year-old girl from the town of Tamworth in Staffordshire, England. She was described to be positive, kind, and happy. Heather was the type of girl who always had a smile on her face and would instantly brighten up a room. She did great in school, had many friends, and was very passionate about dancing. In fact, she was a dance major and would visit her local dance studio, the Belgrave Dance Studio, several times a week to practice her craft. Now, as I have mentioned, Heather was from a town called Tamworth. And just like in so many of these true crime videos, Tamworth was described to be a very safe town with an extremely low crime rate. In fact, the last murder recorded in Tamworth was way back in the early 70s. On August 25th, year 2000, Heather had plans on meeting up with her friend Laura to watch a movie. The two agreed on meeting up outside Belgrave Dance Studio at 8:30 p.m. Now, I am not sure what time Heather left home or how far away this studio was from where she lived, but it seemed pretty near considering the fact that she opted to walk there, just as she did several times a week to practice dancing. Heather took her usual route, passing by Kettlebrook Linear Park, which was more fondly referred to by the locals as Belgrave Park. However, by 8:30 p.m., Heather had not arrived outside the studio yet. And she wasn't the type of person to keep others waiting, so finding this a bit odd or unusual, Laura decided to call Heather's cell phone. However, there was no answer. Laura then waited a few minutes more before calling Heather's house phone, thinking that she might have gotten sick or might have forgotten about their plans that night. Mr. Tell, Heather's father, answered the phone and told Laura that Heather had left a while ago and she should have been there already. And as I've mentioned, this was very unusual for Heather, so the family as well as Laura started to worry. Her family and a few friends went out to look for her on their own, starting at around 9 p.m. However, this area, this Kettlebrook Linear Park was huge and was very overgrown at the time. And it was already pretty dark, and they knew that they couldn't find her alone or they couldn't find her by themselves. So, about an hour later, they decided to call the cops and report Heather as missing. A search party with Heather's friends, family, and police officers was quickly formed. Sniffer dogs were also brought to the scene to help find Heather. However, by midnight, there was still no sign of her. The next morning, August 26th, a family member was cycling through the same park in hopes of finding Heather when he spots what seems to be a naked body peeking out of the bushes. And upon getting a closer look, this family member was sadly able to confirm that this naked body was indeed of Heather Tell. She was no longer alive and was only 17 years old. Police were immediately called to the scene and they quickly cordoned everything off, putting a tent over Heather's body as it had been raining the entire night. And since Heather was found without her clothing, this was automatically seen or treated as a sexually motivated crime. Her clothes and earrings were found relatively close to her body. However, her cell phone, which was said to be broken, was thrown a few feet away. And upon looking at her phone records, it showed that Heather was actually trying to call her house, probably already knowing that she was in danger. Police theorized that the perpetrator or the attacker must have seen Heather trying to call someone and ask for help, and this is when he or she got angry and violent, took Heather's phone and threw it across the park. Now, an autopsy was also conducted, and it showed that Heather's cause of death was asphyxiation due to strangulation. It was also revealed that Heather Tell was strangled using her own shoelace, which tells investigators that this was a crime of opportunity as the attacker didn't have his or her own weapons. Now, the autopsy also revealed that even though the teenager was found naked, she was not sexually assaulted or raped. But this does not mean that this crime wasn't sexually motivated. I mean, the perpetrator still could have gotten some sort of sexual gratification from other things, even though he didn't touch her. Now, the police had no suspect. And as I have mentioned, this was a very safe town, and Heather's murder was the first in almost 30 years. But the authorities did not want to give up on the search, and they did not want this to turn into a cold case. So they decided to look into what they already have, which was very little. The authorities decided to create a suspect profile, and if you are not familiar with what that is, it is basically looking into the victim and the crime itself to try and figure out what type of person they should be on the lookout for. Now, first of all, Heather's body was found in a secluded area of this park, a place that would only be known to someone highly familiar with the place. So from this, investigators were able to gather that whoever did this was a local and was someone who had been living in Tamworth for quite some time already. And since Heather was a 17-year-old girl, the suspect would have probably been an older man with a criminal history, since murder is not usually someone's first crime. It's usually something less extreme like robbery or I don't know what else, but something less extreme than murder. But since this was a sexually motivated crime, the police officers started pulling up files from the last decade, looking at charges or cases that was sexual in nature. So this included public nudity, indecent exposure, rape, sexual assault, and all that gross stuff. And that's how they formed their suspect profile, which was an older local man with a criminal history involving a sexual act. Leads also started coming in. There weren't a lot, but the ones that did were very helpful. Now, there's this guy named Prince who called the police station to say that he saw something sketchy and suspicious the same night Heather was murdered. According to Prince, he was on his bike on the way to his friend's house when he passed by the park and saw a man in his 30s to 40s hiding in one of the bushes. Now, Prince already found this a bit odd, but what happened next caught him completely off guard. According to him, as soon as he got closer to this man, he suddenly put his hands up to his face in an attempt to cover what he looked like. However, Prince just carried on with biking and spent an hour or two at his friend's house before cycling back home. Now, on his way home, he passed by the same route at the park and saw the strange man again. But this time, Prince came face to face with this man as he stopped Prince's bike. I don't know what happened next or if this man ever said anything to Prince, but he was able to take a very good look at this man and was able to provide a very detailed description of what he looked like and what he was wearing. A few days later, another lead came in, and this time it was from a group of co-workers from a stationery store saying that they were worried because one of their workmates told them of her concerns regarding her own father possibly being responsible for what happened to Heather. According to the co-workers, this girl was worried because her father had a history of sex crimes and didn't come home the night Heather was attacked. And upon being asked where he was or what he did, he was not able to provide a reason or an alibi. And he just completely brushed these questions off. She also said that when her father went home in the morning, he was completely drenched. And if you remember, I did mention that it was heavily raining that night up until the morning. Now, the girl's father, this suspect, is named Michael Chidgey, a 45-year-old driver born and raised in Tamworth. He had past run-ins with the law and had previous charges of attempted rape and 10 counts of indecent exposure. So he fit the suspect profile perfectly. He was an older local man with a history of sex crimes. And speaking of his crimes, one or two of the indecent exposure charges against him were at the same park. Now, Michael Chigi was brought in for questioning, and he, of course, denied having any involvement in Heather Tell's murder. However, he wasn't aware that even though it was heavily raining that day, the investigators were still able to obtain a very small amount or piece of male DNA on Heather's bra. Now, this piece of DNA wasn't really big enough to actually be used in finding an exact match, but it was enough for a DNA profile. And when Michael Chigi's DNA was tested against this forensic evidence, it matched. However, he denied having any involvement, saying he was innocent, and the reason why his DNA could have gotten on Heather's bra would be explained by the fact that he liked touching women's underwear in stores. According to Michael Chigi, he got some sort of gratification or satisfaction knowing that he touched a piece of underwear which would later be purchased and worn by a woman, which is very weird and gross. And as crazy and far-fetched that was, the investigators still had to look into this to completely solidify their case. So they brought in an expert from the underwear company or brand to take a look at the condition of Heather's bra, if it seemed to have been new and unwashed, or was it a loved bra. And upon inspection, the representative confirmed that this bra was kind of old and worn out and had been washed multiple times, which meant that the only way Michael Chigi's DNA would have gotten on it was if he were with Heather at the time of her murder, and he did touch her bra when she was wearing it that night. Now, if you remember the first witness, Prince, who saw the strange man at the park, he was called back into the station and was presented with a police lineup of similar-looking men, which included Michael Chigi. And from this lineup, Prince pointed out to Michael Chigi almost immediately, saying that he was sure that it was the man he saw at the park, without a doubt, and this sealed Michael Chigi's fate. Trials began on December 2001, and of course, Prince as well as the company representative came out as witnesses. But surprisingly, Michael Chigi's own wife and daughter also testified against him. Michael Chigi was then found guilty of the murder of 17-year-old Heather Tell and was sentenced to life in prison. He is now in his late 60s and is still incarcerated, and he will remain behind bars until his last sad breath. And he deserves it. Thank you. And that is pretty much all that I have for today's video. As usual, I would love to hear your thoughts on this case. Honestly, this was very sad. I mean, Heather obviously had a very bright future ahead of her. She was a good person. And Michael Chigi definitely deserves to rot behind bars. Again, let me know your thoughts by leaving a comment. And should there be any other true crime story that you would like for me to cover, please let me know by leaving a comment. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys on my next video.